Well, welcome, Ali.
Thanks for having me.
I'm pretty excited. I met you when my buyers bought the train station, the infamous train station. So now I'm blessed that you're my friend, my mentor, my hiking buddy. And so I want to know a little bit more about your over 20 years of experience in real estate because I know you weren't always a realtor. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
I too am grateful for the transaction and I loved working with you. I thought you were amazing and you did a great job advocating for your clients as well. In many transactions, we often hear, when this is done, we should go have a drink or we should go have some coffee. And this was the first time that I got to work with somebody who agreed that when this is done, we should go on a hike. And I loved that. That was a lot of fun. So actually been in this business for over 20 years now. I've only been a licensed agent for just over 10 years, but I've worked in all areas of real estate. I think I first started with typing contracts for timeshares, and then I moved on to being an assistant for a mortgage processor. I've been an appraiser's assistant. I actually got my license to pursue my own investing career. And then once I got into it, I realized that I just really enjoy helping clients achieve their real estate goals. It's more fun.
I love it. What kind of advice would you give to like a brand new realtor in 2025 or 20 going into 2026?
That was not on the question list.
I know, but I'm thinking about all your experience.
If you came into the business because you like selling houses, you're in the wrong business. We're not selling. We're building relationships. As a byproduct, we sell houses, right? Of that, as a consequence of that, but that's not actually what our job is.
No, and that's great advice. I like personally, I no personally. Once I got that perspective, we're not
Mhm.
selling houses. We're helping people figure out how they can achieve their dreams and, like you said, their
Mhm.
real estate goals. Right? I love that
Mhm.
I've made friends with some of my clients, and it's a lot of fun to run
Yeah.
around Las Vegas and hang out with your clients. So let's kind of talk about a lot of clients call and they're like, I want to talk to the listing agent. Okay. And I also think there's sort of a misunderstanding that clients are going to get a better deal on commission if they go straight to the listing agent, which isn't exactly how it works. So one of our topics today is going to be dual agency. And, Allie, you tend to be a listing agent, right? I sold a house that you had listed. And, so I wanted to kind of hear your perspective on that.
I work with both buyers and sellers, but you're right. I primarily work with sellers as a listing agent. And yes, now, especially with the new rules and regulations in place, I do get a lot of phone calls from buyers who believe that by going directly to the listing agent that they're going to get a better deal. And it is typically just not, it's not true. Well, it puts you in a position to not have true representation. If you're going in unrepresented, or if you're going in with the intentions of having the listing agent represent both sides, you're in a bad position either way. And the best position to get you the best deal is to have your own representation. The listing agent or any agent, typically their loyalties lie with whoever they met and started working with first. I have a great story of my first transaction of where I represented both sides, and I'd like to share it with you if you're
Yes,
interested
no, that would be
in
great. Yeah,
hearing.
let's hear it.
I was pretty fresh in the business, maybe within my first 3 years, and I was representing my in-laws on a sale of a property that they had flipped. And so there was a buyer, and I had met them through an open house. At the time, they said they weren't ready to put in an offer, but they liked their work and they really wanted in on the next project that my in-laws were doing. When that situation came across, I called them up. I said, hey, they're about to finish a project. Are you interested in taking a look at it? And they said yes. And so I was in a position to represent both sides. And it was the most stressful, unfun transaction I have ever done, and it almost put me in the hospital. Um,
Wow.
I couldn't sleep. Yeah, it was really bad. And so what happens is it puts you as an agent in a position to not represent anybody. And so the only thing that you are actually able to do is push paperwork. The buyer would ask me, "Hey, what do you think the lowest price they would take is?" And because I represented the seller and I represented the buyer, I couldn't tell them. I wasn't allowed to tell them, right? And so I just kind of sat there and I'm like, well, it's just whatever you think. And so I couldn't advise them on how much to offer. When I did know, I knew how much my in-laws had purchased it for. I knew how much money they had in it. I knew the listing price, obviously. I knew the margins, and I also knew the bottom line of what they would be willing to accept. And I could not advise my buyers on how much they would take. And so the buyers went through, they made an offer got accepted, and then there were counters, and there may have been less if I was only representing one side. But because the buyer was, they're just in a position to basically represent themselves, and so is the seller, because I can't honestly answer their questions. Yes, there's for sure counters going back and forth. Truthfully, looking back, if I had just stepped aside completely, they probably would have done better. It just made it a really messy situation. So if an agent is representing both sides, they're either not representing either side. The only person they're truly representing is themselves, right?
Fair. Yeah.
And then if they're not representing themselves and they truly genuinely are just neutral, then they're just pushing paper. That's all you're doing, because that's all you can do, right? The request for repairs would come, and the buyer would ask me, what repairs do you think they'll do? And typically I would advise, if I was representing the buyer, typically I would tell them, ask for everything, right? Ask for the whole list of what you want, put on the top of what is most important to you. And let's try and make sure those are getting taken care of, anything that is health and safety. And so I take it and I take it back and I present it to my in-laws, and they're like, well, what's most important to them? What do they really want done? And I can't tell them. Because I'm not authorized to disclose that. Anyway, the deal it eventually closed. I don't know if either of them truly felt represented. I did an amazing job of pushing that paperwork.
I put a lot of time and effort to represent my buyers, right? And I get that experience by working with them throughout their buying journey. If they only called the listing agent and then they had to keep calling every listing agent, number one, they're not getting represented, like you said. And number two, they don't have sort of a neutral third party that's able to, I actually do marriage counseling, right? I'll be like, well, you might like this, you might like that. And I
Yep.
help them kind of compromise in a fun way, right? But if you're calling just a listing agent, you're not getting that sort of white glove service.
Service, when a prospective buyer calls me and asks me to represent them, I will always encourage them to go get their own representation. When a buyer has their own representation, that also protects the seller. It opens them up for liability when that buyer doesn't have representation. And I know that sounds weird, but it is in the seller's and the buyer's best interest for both sides to have their own representation. But then if that buyer is unrepresented and I'm only representing the seller's best interest, as you know, I'm a tough advocate for my clients, right? And you need someone on the other side to say, hey, wait a minute, you don't have to take that. There are a few situations where the circumstances are appropriate, right? And that for an agent to represent both sides. And I think that would be if you have maybe like an investor buyer who has done a ton of these transactions already, and they're not from out of state, and they really just need someone to push the paperwork. But even in that situation, you still aren't representing the buyer, right? Or maybe if the seller is already a licensed agent and maybe just not in that state, and then they're able to advocate for themselves. But for just traditional buyers and sellers, I recommend don't do it. Just don't do it.
I don't know what the statistics are. Most buyers do not buy the very first house they look at when they start their search. They might click on a link to go see a property and then it's like, yeah, I don't like this, but it helps them to refine their
Mhm.
criteria. My husband and I had to
Yeah.
look at 101 homes before we agreed on our criteria. I just think it's important to have an agent that's going to be with you on that journey and keep an eye out for properties that they know are coming on the market and you might not
Mm.
find online when you're doing your search.
True.
Like
It's
how many
true.
how many times do I call you and say, "Hey, I've got a client that's looking in Sunrise Manor. Do you have any listings or something coming up?" Right? And
Mhm.
that's a really
Yeah. And I've spoken with a lot of agents who insist, yeah, they insist they've done multiple transactions where they represent both sides and it goes just fine. And but as someone who's in grievance committee, I can tell you they don't all go just fine.
You know
You
what?
know,
That's a really good point. So the
yeah.
grievance committee is with
Mhm.
the Las Vegas Realtors Association, and
Mhm.
so you kind of see when clients are not happy with their representation, what
Yes.
happens on the other end.
They all do basically go back to the same thing, that they didn't feel represented or they didn't disclose or they wanted to back out. And in the end, it always ends with someone not feeling represented. And typically somebody saying someone didn't disclose something.
How about a client that says, "Well, I have a friend who's an agent, but I want you to show me this property. Or my agent isn't available, or my friend's not available today, but I want you to show me this property." I mean, I can talk about it from my perspective because, it takes a lot of effort to drive around Las Vegas and show properties and really, we put a lot of our time and energy into that. But tell me about your thoughts.
You mean you're not in the business of working for free?
Right,
That's
exactly.
that's
Exactly.
not your thing.
No.
Oh, like, weird. Me neither. So, um, well, I think with the new rules that have been put into place, a lot of us followed them uh, previously when it comes to buyers and us needing a buyer broker agreement. It kind of helps to weed that out, you know. And so now we're not even allowed to show you a house without having a signed buyer broker agreement, and that I'm really grateful for that because we did get a lot of those phone calls, right? Like, hey, can you just go show me this house? My agent's busy or my agent's on vacation and I don't want to bother them. And so the new rules that implement us having an agreement signed before we're allowed to open a door eliminates that, which is nice. And so I not majority of the public isn't up to speed with that yet, right? Because there's still pretty new rules and regulations that are in place. But the nice part is too, when they call one agent and ask that question, hopefully they're getting the same answer from every agent that they call of that's fine. I'm happy to show you as long as you're willing to sign a buyer broker agreement. And so just because we have to have those signed now before we open.
That was the NAR result, the lawsuit that settled last year in August of 2024, and basically
Mm-hmm.
said that buyers needed representation. So these buyer broker agreements, they don't just protect the agent, right? They also protect the buyers because these agreements talk about duties owed. We owe the clients transparency, confidentiality, honesty. These are all things that we owe, and we're protecting those buyers as well as being protected ourselves from someone wanting to call every single listing agent and running around to different homes.
Also, that leads into working with family and friends.
When people say to me, "Well, my friend is a realtor or my cousin is a realtor," my first question is, "Why are you waiting to engage them?" "Well, I don't want to bother them." Well, if they're working for you and they're going to earn that commission for your purchase, then they also need to be able to, represent you and know what your tastes are and, do that work up front, right? That's part of getting paid. But second of all,
Mm-hmm.
do you really want that particular family or friend in your financial affairs, right? They're going to know how much you qualify for in terms of, pre-approvals because they're going to be in contact with the lender.
On a serious note, I am a huge fan of loyalty and supporting your friends and family, right? Like, I think that is, um, I think that's the right way to go if it works for you. On the flip side, it's a huge purchase or sale. You're talking about potentially a 30-year commitment, right? If not a minimum of 5, right? That's not even the average that we keep homes nowadays. I think our buyers typically keep their home on average of 8 to 10 years, I think is the current stat. It's a big commitment, right? It's probably one of the biggest purchases you're ever going to make. And I think it's important, whether you're choosing a family or a friend to represent you, if they're qualified for your intentions, right? At the end of the day, I say you pick the best man for the job. And the question is, what is most important to you, right? Is maintaining that relationship and supporting that friend or family most important, or is having a good agent most important? And you should probably decide that right up front. But if they're not qualified to do both, you need to know that going in. And I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. Another story. So when I first started in the business, I was probably about a year in, and I was doing great. I was averaging 7% above market value on all of my listings, and I was getting them under contract within days of listing. And my brother and my sister-in-law I had been helping them look and home shop, and they said, okay, we're ready now. We're ready to sell our house. I was super excited about it. It was actually the highest price point listing that I had ever taken new in my career. I think I was like 12 months in. My brother and my sister-in-law insisted to pay me my full commission. And I said, no. I did give them a discount, but they were like, no, we're going to pay you the full commission. And I was ecstatic and grateful, right? And so excited to work for them, especially leveling up in a new community with a new price point. And so I listed their home. I did the same thing for their house that I did with all my other listings that went really great. And it sat and sat and sat and sat. And so now it's coming up to 90 days on the market. I had a little bit of activity in the beginning, but then it was just kind of crickets. And my brother was sending me photos of these postcards that agents were mailing to him about what we do when your listing expires, why listings expire, things of this nature. He wasn't happy with the service, right? Understandably, because I was not selling his house. And so I had to have a bit of an ego death moment, right? Of going, hey, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. And I had to reassess the whole situation, right? And so he was put in a position to have to tell me that he wasn't happy. His listing was coming up to expire, and he was letting me know that he was going to interview other agents. And that put him in a terrible position, no doubt, right? Am I going to support my sister, or am I going to sell my house? And so I put some thought into it. I had to reassess, right? Why did I fail? Where did this go wrong? And I eventually came to him when he was in the process of interviewing other agents. And I did a lot of homework. I really heavily researched the market, and I learned what I did wrong and what I needed to do moving forward. And so I came to him and I said, hey, while you're interviewing other agents, I'd like another shot at an interview. He gave me another shot, and I was really grateful. And I knocked it out of the park the second time around. So if you're a friend or a family who's representing friend or family, I think you need to be willing to let them know up front what they're getting into, and make sure you have support in the background. As long as they have good brokerage support, I encourage it. If your priority is selling your house, make sure you interview that agent. It doesn't matter who they are, and make sure they're a good fit. And at the end of the day, if you decide they're not a good fit, you can soften the blow by saying, hey, I'm going to go with this other agent, but they'll pay you a referral fee.
Recently, when I was talking to a newer client, and she said, well, I've got this friend that, she told me when I'm ready to start looking, she'd like to take me and be my agent. And I kind of had this conversation with her, and I said, I would be happy to give her a referral fee. And that way her friend is still, getting a referral fee, right? She's getting something with minimal work, and I'm able to represent her and work with her. And it actually was, you actually gave me that advice. It worked out perfectly. We know that relationships are important, but we just don't want you to run around and go look at homes with other agents and then waste it's wasting their time because they're not going to get anything out of it. And agents, we do a lot of work and we don't want to necessarily work for free.
We don't get paid unless we close a deal,
Right,
and
right,
so there
exactly.
there is a lot of working for free. whether
Right,
whether we want to do it or not, it happens.
right, right.
Yeah.
You're not getting paid to sit in an open house on a Saturday or Sunday all day.
Crazy enough, no, we're not. These are probably two of my most favorite like hot topics to hit on, right? Representing both sides of the transaction and then working with family and friends. Just they're very taboo, and it brings up a lot of emotions for people.
Mm.
And I think there's a lot of mixed emotions about it, right? And so I think you've done a great job of picking these two topics, and I look forward to more.
That sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Allie. We'll see you on the next episode or the next hike.